Hey everyone, back for the third and final topic for week two, which is emotion and mood. Um, there's quite a lot just in general on this topic. A lot of psychological research has gone into this subject, enough to fill up entire classes. So we'll be going through some basic elements that are relative to or that are important to motivation. And so we'll go through a couple theories, talk about some of the effects of emotion or affects. We'll go through some functions or the importance of emotion and affect, as well as talking about how we have this tendency to always try and read or perceive emotions in others, even animals, as you can see here. It's just kind of a natural tendency to look at these pictures and see, either a happy dog here or a sad dog here. I guess pugs kind of always seem sad. But, anyways, so I just want to reiterate this. This is from the Introduction to Motivation lecture, the first one you all watched. And so I just want to mention again that emotions are very important for motivation and that they can signal values of certain stimuli or objects in the environment. Like, if you look at something and you see disgust, that signals that that thing is bad and you probably don't want to eat that thing. Emotions can play a large role in goal progress and signaling how we're doing with goal progress. So negative emotions are often associated with feeling as though our goal progress is not going well, versus positive emotions oftentimes come along when we feel like we're doing a good job in attaining the goals that we're pursuing. And emotions themselves can also be end states. So we oftentimes try to reach states of positive emotion and stay away from negative feelings. So in this first video, the topic we'll be going over here specific to emotion is emotion experience. And so your book mentions these. There are a few distinct emotion channels per se. So there's subjective psychological experience, otherwise termed affect. There's facial expressions. There's behaviors that typically go along with certain emotions. So like laughter is often associated with happiness, crying with sadness, behaviors like aggression or even less than that, like clenching your fists or whatever would be associated with anger. And then there's also the physiological channel of emotion. Common measures of that are heart rate and skin conductance. So again, with emotional experience here, participants in this study that you see on the right watched a film clip. And so this film consisted of a couple of components. And so the beginning of this film and the end of this film are more happy slash funny parts versus the middle of the film had sad components. And the experimenters, Maus et al., measured participant, or yeah, they had participants rate subjective experience. So that's the experience here, or just affect. I guess what you typically think of emotion, like how they subjectively felt. They also measured behavior. So behavior was filmed and coded. By coded, I just mean that probably some research assistants went through and watched those films and just signaled whenever the participants were showing behavioral signs of either sadness or happiness or whatever it was. So, crying or laughter would be examples of that. And also, again, cardiovascular activity and skin conductance level are very popular measures of physiological emotion. And so they found about what you would expect. So in terms of amusement, This seems to follow the stages of that film, with more amusement matching kind of the funny or happy parts of that, and the exact opposite happened with sadness, where sadness peaked in the middle during the sad parts of the film. Um, Amusement behavior was higher at the beginning and end, and sadness behavior was highest at the middle section of the film. Again, that makes sense. And finally, with physiology, we'll talk a bit about how higher amounts of arousal are often seen with more positive emotions. So we seem to have a dip in emotion here, likely during the sadness part of the film, and then the peaks are at those happy or funny parts. And same thing here with skin conductance level, higher levels are at the happy, funny parts of that film. It says some implications. I don't know if that's kind of blocked there. I think it is. That says lie detectors. So one of the main reasons why lie detectors aren't admissible as evidence in court settings is because clearly, as we see, these are two of the three things that lie detectors measure. And so they don't only get out whether you're lying or telling the truth, they can also measure things like emotion and mood. So when you use lie detectors, can't always be too positive what exactly you're measuring there. So a very key prominent theory in emotion is the James Lange theory, which maybe, at least for me when I was first learning about this, was a little bit counterintuitive, but the basic idea is that emotions are directly connected to physiological arousal. And so oftentimes we see that, as I mentioned on the last slide, higher arousal, there's higher arousal for positive states and less arousal for negative states. So when you think about, like, take a second and think about, how does it feel physiologically to be sad, angry, happy, in love? Can you tell? Are there distinct differences between all these things? Are there similarities? So, anger is often associated with like that, the feeling of just getting kind of hot, the behaviors of, again, like clenched fists and all that, higher heart rate. However, sadness would be associated likely with, more that parasympathetic, okay, more of a relaxation, less, not relaxation, I guess that's the wrong word, but lower heart rates, things like that. But then interestingly, between some of these things, right, you're going to see some similarities. So they're not completely distinct based on physiological arousals. Like, again, as I mentioned, anger oftentimes associated with just kind of the hot feeling. And you can get similar things with feelings of being in love, like the whole saying of, love at first sight. You might feel butterflies in your stomach when you see that person. You might also kind of blush, get a little red in the face, and have kind of hot feelings as well. One thing that I think is interesting from this is and you won't be tested on this part here, but I just think it's interesting trying to think about, and there's a debate about it, whether anger is a positive or negative emotion. So again, positive states like happiness, excitement are oftentimes associated with that higher arousal. And there's typically less arousal for negative states, but anger in itself has more arousal, right? But we do typically think that anger is more of a negative state because we don't oftentimes feel good when we're angry, but we do have a lot of those same physiological reactions as in positive emotions. So just something I thought was interesting to think about. But the main takeaway from James Lange is that, kind of from my perspective, a counterintuitive part, which is where it's not based on this theory, it's not the emotion that leads to the types of physiological arousal. It's physiological arousal that you feel is classified then and leads to the emotional or affective states. And so your book will talk about that a little bit more in depth. But yeah, the basic idea is that you have the stimulus in the environment, and from that stimulus, you get the physiological arousal, and then you classify that into a certain emotion or affective experience. A key aspect, again, one of those channels that I brought up was facial expression. And so this is in large part based on the research of Ekman. So Ekman, we'll try not to ramble on too much about this, but it's just another thing I think is interesting is there is a large debate, an ongoing debate about whether discrete emotions, and discrete emotions being like anger, sadness, whether those are innate and evolved. And so Ekman takes that perspective and argues based on his research for that these emotions such as anger, sadness have evolved to serve certain functions that are adaptive, but there's definitely mixed evidence about whether there are universal emotions and whether those discrete emotions are evolved and adaptive, or whether the flip side of that, the other argument is that they are kind of socially constructed based on language. So then that is Feldman Barrett research, that's her name. And so the argument there is that these discrete emotions in themselves are not evolved and adapted, but we have feelings of valence and arousal that we then, based on the language that we have, is used to construct these names for the emotions like anger, sadness, things like that. So that's the debate. Let me know if you're interested. I can certainly supply more readings for that. I won't go into that more today, but just kind of an interesting debate there. And so the reason why I brought that up initially is just because a large portion of that debate relies on the universality of emotion research in general. And I guess the main supporting aspect for these discrete emotions is facial expressions. So again, a lot of this relies on cross-cultural research. And so oftentimes we don't see these cross-cultural results that we would expect, where I guess we might expect everyone to just understand these emotions and that they should be universal. But that's actually not always the case. So then the question is, are we just bad at measuring emotion? Are these discrete emotions evolved? Does everyone have them and we're just bad at measuring them? Or do we just need to kind of adapt and change our understanding of emotion? But based on this Ekman research with facial expressions, there does seem to be cross-cultural evidence of 6 universal expressions shown here. And so shown in both of these images. So you have anger, disgust, happiness, sadness, fear, and surprise. And so the first 4 especially seem to be relatively easily selected when you see those faces cross-culturally. The surprise and fear, the fear, surprise, seem to be a little bit more difficult. But yeah, those are based on Ekman's research, those are the 6 universal facial expressions. And again, the idea is that these have evolved and that they have a social function. And so the social function is kind of to signal to others what you're feeling. And then based on that, you kind of hope that they recognize how to behave based on how you're feeling and vice versa. And so watch this video. It's really interesting. Might kind of make you feel a little bad for the baby in the middle of this video, but it's just a couple minutes and it shows that Even babies are making inferences on and are relying on facial expressions, in this case, of the mom. And in the video, as you'll see, the mom just like on a dime just turns around and stops making facial expressions, and the baby really does not like that. So that's it for this video. Next, we'll get into more about this interpretation of emotions. Nope. Huh. It's not letting me stop. There we go. Sorry about that.